The ornate wagon felt like a coffin. It smelled of new paint and old lies, a thick, stifling combination that clung to the back of Clara Monroe's throat. Outside, the iron-rimmed wheels churned through the rock and dust of the New Mexico territory, each jolt a reminder of how far she was from anything she had ever called home. Her hands were clenched in the lap of her gray traveling dress, knuckles white. The fabric, good wool, was damp with the sweat of her palms. Beside her, her stepfather, Arthur Pendleton, was speaking. His voice was a low, self-satisfied rumble that seemed to stain the air, much like the scent of the whiskey on his breath. This alliance, Clara, will solidify the Pendleton name from Santa Fe to the Cimarron, he said, gesturing with a soft, ringed hand toward the barren landscape outside the window. Old man Haverford understands the value of loyalty. His son will be a fine match. A fine match. Clara kept her gaze fixed on the sliver of world she could see. Endless, wind-scoured plains, cracked earth pulling away from itself like a wound. Far-off ridgelines, the color of rust and shadow, looked sharp enough to cut the sky. This was not a land of opportunity. It was a land of survival, and she was failing at it. She knew the truth. This was not an alliance. It was a sale. She was the final payment for Arthur's debts, the last asset of the Monroe Mercantile, which he had gambled into ruin. The man she was being sent to, this unseen son of a wealthy merchant, was not a husband. He was a creditor. Her dowry, riding in the wagon behind them, was not a gift. It was collateral, a pile of goods and coin to appease the notorious outlaw gang Arthur had borrowed from and foolishly tried to cheat. A sudden gust of wind slammed a sheet of dust against the wagon, and Arthur flinched, brushing at the lapel of his fine coat. "This land," he muttered, his good cheer evaporating. "Filth, utter filth. We should have been in Santa Fe 2 days ago." Clara said nothing. She had learned years ago that her voice was a currency Arthur did not value. He had married her mother for the mercantile and, upon her mother's death, had inherited Clara as just another piece of inventory. She hid the desperation, the screaming, hollow terror, behind a mask of cool composure. It was the only armor she had left. She was Clara Monroe, daughter of a man who had built his life on honesty and hard work. She would not give Arthur the satisfaction of seeing her break. Not yet, but inside, she was vibrating with the same unsteady rhythm as the wagon. She was being given away, body and soul, to a stranger. She would be his property, just as she had been Arthur's. The thought of a stranger's touch, of a life lived under another man's thumb, made her stomach clench with a cold, hard dread. The land outside was hostile, a perfect mirror for her future. They passed dry ravines where shadows gathered like waiting men. Dust devils spun in the distance, ghostly and erratic. This was a place where lawmen were scarce, and power was claimed by the men who held the fastest guns. Men like the ones Arthur owed. Men who patrolled these very hills. That night, they made camp in the shallow bowl of a dried-up riverbed. The escort riders Arthur had hired, 8 men, broad-shouldered and loud, seemed small against the immensity of the dark. Their fire was a nervous spark in the vast, swallowing emptiness. Clara sat apart, wrapped in a blanket, pretending to watch the flames. She was listening. The wind carried the sound of the men's voices, stripped of their daytime bravado. Heard tell the Apache kid's been riding this stretch. One man, barely more than a boy, whispered, "Ain't Apaches." A grizzled older man named Shaw grunted, spitting tobacco into the fire. "It's Cole Younger's bunch, or someone just as mean. They say they hit the silver wagon out of Taos, left no one alive to tell it." "This ain't no silver wagon," another voice said. "Just a girl." "It's the dowry, you fool," Shaw shot back. "Pendleton's parading it like a prize hog. Gold, silver, rifles. Enough to make a man rich. Or dead." A cold finger of fear, sharper than the night air, traced its way down Clara's spine. A trap. She had felt it for days. A prickling on her skin. A tightness in the air. She stood, the blanket falling from her shoulders. and walked to where Arthur was sipping brandy from a silver flask by the wagon. The escort leader, Shaw, was with him. "Arthur," she said, her voice clear and firm. He looked up, annoyed. "Clara, it is unseemly for you to be wandering. Go to your tent. I heard the men talking. They're worried about outlaws. They said you're carrying too much, that it looks like a trap." Arthur's face, pale in the firelight, darkened. "You will not question my arrangements. Girl, these men are paid to handle ruffians." "But what if it's more than they can handle?" she insisted, turning to the escort leader. "Mr. Shaw, your men are afraid. They feel it too." Shaw looked at the ground, then at Arthur, then back to the ground. He shifted his gun belt. "Ma'am, with respect, this ain't ladies' business. We can handle whatever comes. Your stepfather is a generous man. We'll see you to Santa Fe." Clara looked at the man's evasive eyes and knew, with chilling certainty, that he was lying. He was paid, yes, but he was not loyal. He was a hired gun, and his first loyalty was to his own skin. Arthur grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. "That is enough," he hissed, his whiskey-soured breath hot on her face. "Go to your tent. Your hysterics are unsettling the men. You will be a bride, not a strategist." He shoved her toward the small canvas tent set up for her. She stumbled, catching herself, and turned to look at him one last time. He had already turned back to the fire, lifting his flask. She was ignored. She was cargo, and she was riding directly into the jaws of a trap, 100 miles south, in a town that was little more than a collection of adobe huts and dried mud despair. Levi Grayson rolled a single coin over the knuckles of his left hand. The cantina smelled of stale beer, sweat, and the sharp, smoky tang of cheap tequila. He was in the corner, in the shadow, where he preferred to be. He nursed a warm beer, his hat pulled low. He was just passing through, drifting between cattle outfits. Same as he had for the past 6 years. He was a solitary man by nature, made more so by the war. The world had burned in those years, and he had burned with it. He had come home to find nothing left, so he had drifted west, looking for a place quiet enough to let him forget. He hadn't found it. His solitude was interrupted by the voices of 2 men at the bar. Freighters, by the look of their dusty coats and loud talk. "Heard it from a man in Las Vegas," the first one said, leaning in. "This merchant, Pendleton, from Santa Fe. He's taking a wedding wagon north. His stepdaughter." Levi's hand stilled. The coin dropped to the table with a dull clink. "So?" the second man asked. "So?" The first one grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "He ain't just carrying a bride. He's carrying a fortune in dowry, gold, guns, you name it. And they say he's using it to pay off the Barrow gang. Seems he gambled on the wrong side of a card game. The Barrows. That man is a fool. They'll take the gold and the girl. That's the rumor. They say the trap is set for dusk, tomorrow, somewhere near the San Cristobal Ridges. An ambush. They'll make it look like a robbery. But it's a collection." The second man whistled. "That poor girl." Levi stood. The sudden movement scraped his chair back, and the cantina went quiet for a beat. The 2 freighters looked over, their grins fading. Levi was not a large man, but he moved with a stillness that promised violence. He was lean, hardened by the sun and the saddle. His face was all sharp angles and shadow, his eyes a pale, cold gray that had seen too much. He tossed the coin onto the bar. "What's the girl's name?" he asked. His voice was rough, like stones grinding together. The first freighter, unnerved, cleared his throat. "Don't know. Mister, just heard Pendleton's stepdaughter." Levi knew. Arthur Pendleton. He knew that name, and he knew the stepdaughter. Clara Monroe." He turned and walked out of the cantina, leaving his beer untouched. The name echoed in his skull like a gunshot. Clara, the girl he had protected as a boy, the girl he had played with in the streams and fields of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. The girl whose face, tear-streaked and confused, was the last thing he'd seen when he rode off to a war that had devoured his soul. He had left her behind. He had told himself it was to protect her, that the thing he had become, a hollowed-out shell, a killer, had no place near her innocence. He had told himself she was better off, that she would have forgotten him, married some decent man, lived a soft life. The guilt that had kept him away, that had been his constant companion for 6 long years, now twisted into a hot, sharp blade of pure rage. Pendleton, that gambler, that snake. He had married Clara's mother and bled the family dry, and now he was selling Clara. Levi was at the livery before he even registered the walk. His horse, a tough bay gelding, whinnied softly as he approached. He saddled the animal with practiced, economical movements. His mind was clear. The fog of memory and regret had burned away, leaving only the grim certainty of action. He swung into the saddle, his shotgun resting easy in the scabbard. He knew the San Cristobal ridges. He could make it by dusk tomorrow, if he rode hard, if he rode without stopping, if he rode through the ghosts that were already rising to meet him. As he spurred the gelding into a lope, heading north into the darkening desert, the memories came. The smell of cannon smoke, the screams of men and horses, the weight of his brother, Jesse dying in his arms in a muddy field in Georgia. "Go home, Levi," Jesse had whispered, coughing blood. "Go home and live." But he hadn't. He had come west, running from the home that held too much pain. And then, Clara's face, not the child, but the young woman she was becoming when he left. Standing on the porch of the Monroe house, her hands twisting in her apron, her eyes wide with a question he refused to answer. "You'll come back?" she had asked. He had said nothing. He had just turned his horse and ridden away. He had broken his promise. He had broken her trust. And now, he was the only one who even knew she was in danger. "Hold on, Clara," he whispered to the wind, a prayer to a God he no longer believed in. He urged the horse faster, riding into the vast, haunted dark. The ambush struck at dusk. The sky was a bruised purple and orange, the light failing fast. They were in a narrow pass, the ridges rising high and black on either side. It started not with a shout, but with a sound like a wet cough. The young rider at the head of the column gasped, clutching his throat, and toppled from his horse. Then, the world exploded. Gunfire erupted from the rocks above, a deafening cascade of noise. Horses screamed and reared. The wagon driver, a bullet in his chest, fell from his seat, and the heavy wagon lurched to a halt, its wheels snapping against a boulder. Shaw, the escort leader, fired 2 wild shots into the rocks before spinning his horse. "It's a rout! Every man for himself!" He screamed, and fled back the way they had come. The other riders, those who were not already dead or dying, scattered like quail. Arthur Pendleton shrieked, a high, thin sound of pure terror, and dove from the wagon, scrambling to hide behind a rock. Inside, Clara was thrown hard against the wall. Smoke was already coiling in through the splintered window. An oil lamp, knocked from its hook, had shattered, and flames were licking up the canvas side. "Arthur!" she screamed, but her stepfather was gone. She was alone. She was going to burn. Coughing, her eyes stinging, she clawed at the jammed door. It wouldn't budge. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to paralyze her. No, she would not die here. She would not be burned alive in this carriage. She found the heavy iron poker for the small wood stove, and with a scream of rage and terror, she smashed it against the wooden panel of the door again and again, until the wood split. She kicked her way out, tumbling onto the rocky ground, just as the wagon's roof began to collapse in a shower of embers. The gunfire had mostly stopped. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of sulfur and burning wool. A man on a dark horse rode toward her, his face covered by a red kerchief. He was flanked by 6 others, all of them armed, their eyes cold over their masks. "Well, well," the leader's voice was a low growl. He dismounted, his spurs chiming. "Look what crawled out of the fire! The bride!" Clara scrambled to her feet. Her hands balled into fists. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, her face streaked with soot. "Where's Pendleton?" the man demanded. "He ran," Clara spat, her voice raw. The man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Did he now? That changes things. The debt ain't paid, but you'll fetch a fine price south of the border." He lunged for her. Clara fought. She was not a damsel. She was a survivor. She raked her nails across his face, aiming for his eyes. He roared and backhanded her, the force of the blow sending her sprawling. She hit the ground hard, the taste of blood and dust filling her mouth. Her dignity was bruised, her hope shattered, but her fury was a bright, clean flame. She spat the blood at his feet. "You'll hang for this," she whispered. He laughed again, reaching down to grab her by the hair. "Not today, little bird. Today you're mine." He was yanking her to her feet, pulling her toward his horse, when a new sound split the air. It was not the sharp crack of a rifle, but the deep, definitive roar of a shotgun. The man holding her stiffened. A dark, spreading stain appeared on the center of his chest. His eyes went wide with surprise. He looked down, then at her, and crumpled to the ground. Clara fell with him, landing on her hands and knees. Through the thick, roiling smoke, a lone rider appeared. He was not on the ridge. He was on the road, having ridden straight through the chaos. He sat on a bay gelding, a smoking shotgun in one hand. He rode forward slowly, the horse's hooves crunching on the gravel. The remaining outlaws, startled by this new arrival, raised their rifles. The rider was calm. He dropped the shotgun into its scabbard and drew his revolver in a single, fluid motion. He fired twice. 2 more outlaws fell from their saddles. The remaining men, seeing their leader dead and this new, silent threat, hesitated. This was not the fight they had signed up for. With a panicked shout, they wheeled their horses and fled into the dark hills. The rider did not watch them go. His eyes were fixed on Clara. He dismounted and walked toward her. He was tall, dressed in trail-worn clothes, his hat pulled low. Smoke and shadow obscured his face. Clara pushed herself up, trembling, her body one great aching bruise. She did not know if this man was a savior or just another devil. He stopped a few feet from her. He looked at the burning wagon, at the dead outlaws, and then his gaze settled back on her. He pushed his hat back. The world stopped. It was not possible. The face was older, harder, carved by sun and pain. There was a scar high on his left cheek she didn't recognize. But the eyes were the same. The pale, steady gray that she had looked to for comfort her entire childhood. "Levi," she breathed. The name was a prayer and a curse. He said nothing. His face was a mask of unreadable emotion. He looked at her torn dress, the blood on her lip, the fire in her eyes. He stepped forward, his movement stiff, and held out his hand. She flinched. He stopped. "Clara," he said, his voice deeper, rougher, but it was his. "We have to go, now." Gunfire echoed from the hills. The outlaws, regrouping. Or maybe Arthur, running into more trouble. It didn't matter. Levi moved. He was at her side in an instant, not with tenderness, but with a fierce, desperate urgency. He bent, sliding one arm under her knees, the other around her back, and lifted her as if she weighed nothing. He carried her to his horse, settled her sideways in the saddle, and swung up behind her. His arm, solid as oak, wrapped around her waist, pulling her tight against his chest. She was pinned between his body and the horse's neck. She could feel the heat of him, the solid beat of his heart against her back. He smelled of leather, sweat, and the cold, clean night air. Their eyes locked, just for a moment, in that single, silent gaze. 6 years of history slammed between them. Her pain at his abandonment, his guilt, her fury, his regret, and under it all, a sudden, shocking spark of a longing so deep it stole her breath. Then he broke the look, turning his head to scan the ridges. "Hold on," he growled. He kicked the gelding, and the horse leaped forward, charging not back down the road, but straight up the rocky incline, into the dark, trackless hills, leaving the fire and the dead behind. Bullets whined past them, smacking into the rocks as the outlaws fired from the darkness. Clara buried her face in the horse's mane, her hands gripping the saddle horn, and held on as Levi Grayson, the ghost from her past, rode them hard into the unforgiving night. He pushed her into the darkness, a rough hand on her back, and she stumbled, catching herself on the cold. damp wall of the cave. Then he was gone, back to the entrance, a shadow against the pale moonlight. She heard him whispering to his horse, the sounds of a man settling an animal, followed by the metallic scrape of his canteen. The cave smelled of old, wet stone and the faint, dry musk of bats. It was not a refuge. It was a tomb. Clara sank to the dusty floor, her body one complete, throbbing ache. The adrenaline that had kept her rigid in his arms, that had frozen her terror during the mad ride up the canyon, was now gone. It drained out of her, leaving a cold, hollow space that filled instantly with a searing, white-hot rage. She was alive, she was safe, and she had never been more furious. Levi reappeared, a solid black shape against the gray opening. He carried his saddlebags and rifle. He set them down near the wall, his movements economical and silent, as if he had spent a lifetime moving in the dark. He did not look at her. He began to search his bags by feel. "Here," he said. His voice was a low rasp. A small, dark object landed in her lap, a piece of dried jerky. Clara's hand closed around it. Her knuckles were skinned, the skin on her palms raw. She looked at the meat, then at the shadow of the man who had given it to her. 6 years, she said. Her voice, thin and cracked, echoed in the small space. Levi stilled. He was kneeling, his back to her. 6 years. Levi, not a word, not a letter, not even a rumor. You were gone. You were dead. He did not turn. I wasn't. No, she said, her voice rising, gaining a terrible, sharp edge. You weren't. You were just somewhere else. While my mother died. While Arthur sold off my father's store. Piece by piece. While she choked on the words, the humiliation of her situation washing over her. While he arranged this, where were you? He finally turned. She could not see his face, only the outline of his shoulders, the tension in his frame. War. War. She spat the word. War ended years ago. We all heard. We all lost people. Jesse, I cried for Jesse. I cried for you. And you just stayed away. She was on her feet, though she didn't remember standing. She took 2 steps toward him, her body trembling so violently, her teeth chattered. And now you ride in, now, like some hero, like you're saving me. You are the one I needed saving from. He stood to his full height. He was closer than she thought. He was real. Clara, be quiet. Sound travels. Does it? She whispered, a terrible, low sound. Did my sound travel? Did you hear me? All those nights, wondering if you were alive, wondering why you left me, why you broke your promise. I never promised you anything. His voice was flat, dead. That broke her. It was a slap, harder than the one the outlaw had given her. She raised a hand to strike him, a wild, grieving gesture. He caught her wrist. His grip was like iron. It did not hurt, but it held. It was absolute. She was trapped. Don't, he said, just that one word. Why? She cried, and this time her voice broke, the fury collapsing into a raw, ragged sob. She pulled against his grip, but he held fast. Why did you come back? You were in trouble. And you wouldn't have come if it was just me, if it wasn't some ambush, some fight you could ride into. Would you have ever come home? His silence was the answer. It screamed in the damp air. He released her wrist. She stumbled back, the last of her strength gone. The sobs came, ugly. Tearing sounds pulled from a place she thought she had buried. She sank to the floor again, her body folding in on itself. She was so cold, the night air had seeped into her bones. The wedding dress, a mockery of fine lace and silk, was in tatters. It was stiffening with dried mud and her own blood. She began to tremble. The deep, uncontrollable shudders of shock. She heard him move. A moment later, something heavy and warm landed on her shoulders. It was his coat. It smelled of him, of horse, leather, gun oil, and dust. It was the scent she associated with her childhood, with safety, with the boy who had taught her to skip stones and find the sweetest wild berries. She pulled it tighter, burying her face in the rough wool, and cried. She cried for her lost father, For her weary mother, for the life she had been forced to live, and for the man who stood just feet away, a ghost she could touch. Levi watched her. His guilt was a physical thing, a sickness in his gut, a taste of ash in his mouth. He did not apologize. Words were useless. He had left her. He had done it, he told himself, to protect her. He had come back from the war with so much blood on his hands, with a darkness in his soul, that he couldn't bear to let her see it. He had been a wolf, and she was the last lamb he had cared for. So he had stayed away. He had thought his absence was a kindness. He saw now, in the ruin of her, in the tattered dress and the raw grief, that his absence had been a betrayal. He had left her to a different kind of wolf. He struck a match. The sudden flare of light was shocking. Clara flinched, looking up, her face a pale, tear-streaked, soot-stained oval. In the flickering light, he saw the cut on her lip, a dark bruise forming on her cheek. He lit a small nub of a candle from his saddlebag and set it on a rock. The cave was small, a shallow opening in the rock, just deep enough to hide them and the horse. He took his canteen and a bandana. He knelt in front of her. She watched him, her eyes wide and wary. "This will sting," he said. He poured water onto the cloth and gently, his touch surprisingly careful for a man with such hard hands. He began to clean the dirt from her face. He brushed the grime from her cheeks. He dabbed at the cut on her lip, and she hissed in pain but did not pull away. She was looking at his hands. They were scarred, the knuckles broad, the skin cracked. She remembered those hands. They had once held a bird's nest, showing her the pale blue eggs. They had pulled her from the river when she fell. Her own hand, trembling, lifted. It hovered in the air between them, uncertain. Then it settled on his, covering his hand as it rested on her cheek. His skin was warm. Her skin was ice. She felt the tremor that ran through him at her touch. His gaze locked on hers. The candle flame guttered, casting shadows that danced in his pale gray eyes. The moment was charged. The air was thick with everything unsaid. The anger was still there, and the grief, but beneath it, pulsing like a buried ember, was the deep, aching pull of their shared history, of the desire they had both felt as teenagers and had been too young, or too afraid, to name. Clara did not pull her hand away, and he did not move. They stayed like that, frozen. For a long, silent minute, it was Clara who finally spoke, her voice a raw whisper. "He gambled everything. Levi, my father's store, the house, all of it. He would go to Las Vegas, to Santa Fe. He'd be gone for weeks. He'd come back, all smiles, with gifts. And then the men would come." Levi's hand, still under hers, tensed. "What men? Hard men, like the ones tonight. They came to the house. They were quiet, polite at first. Then they weren't. They threatened him. They threatened me." She looked away, at the dark wall of the cave. This marriage, it wasn't an alliance. It was a payment, the dowry wagon. It was for the Barrow gang. Arthur was paying them with my marriage, with the goods. He was paying them with me. And I think he meant for them to take it all, to make it look like a robbery, so he could be free of the debt and free of me. Levi's face was carved from stone. "He was selling you. I was the last thing he had left to sell," she said. The quiet resignation in her voice was more heartbreaking than her tears. "I was so tired. Levi, I was so tired of fighting him, of being afraid. I thought, if I just did it, if I just went, maybe it would be over. Maybe the man I was to marry would be kind. At least he wouldn't be Arthur." She took a shuddering breath. "And then I saw the fire, and I heard the guns, and I knew he had led me into a trap. And then I saw you." She looked back at him, and I didn't know if it was the same trap or a different one. Levi pulled his hand back. He sat on his heels, the silence stretching. He picked up a small stone and turned it over and over in his fingers. "The war," he said, his voice distant. "You think you know what it is. You hear the speeches, God and country and honor. It ain't none of that. It's just watching boys die. For nothing." He looked at the stone. Not at her. I watched Jesse die. He was holding my hand. He bled out in a muddy field. There was nothing I could do. He was 19. Clara, he hadn't even... He was just a kid. His voice was rough, the words coming out hard, as if he were pulling them from his own chest. I did things. To the men who... I did things. You don't come back from that. You don't just wash the blood off and go home and be the person you were. That person is dead. He died with Jesse. He tossed the stone. It clicked against the far wall. I came home, or I came near home. I stood on the ridge, and I looked down at the house. Your house. I saw you on the porch, hanging laundry. You were wearing a blue dress, and I couldn't... The man I was a shell. I was filled with gunpowder and ghosts. I couldn't bring that to you. I couldn't stain you with it. So I turned around. I thought you'd be safe, that you'd marry some decent man, a farmer, a shopkeep, someone who deserved you. He looked at her, his eyes hollow in the candlelight. I was a fool. I just left you to a different kind of war. They sat in silence. The confessions hung in the air. 2 different kinds of pain, 2 different kinds of survival that had somehow, impossibly, led them to the same dark cave. Dawn came slowly, a reluctant gray light seeping into the mouth of the cave. It revealed the filth and the ruin. Clara's dress, a pale, ghostly color, was stiff with grime. Levi's face was gaunt, his jaw covered in dark stubble, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. The light brought a new, cold reality. They'll be searching, Levi said. He was checking his rifle, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. They won't just let this go. They lost their leader, and they lost their payment. They'll want both, revenge, and you. Clara's stomach tightened. What about Arthur? My stepfather. Surely he will. He'll what? Levi snapped, not unkindly, but with a brutal honesty. He'll protect you? He's the one who put you in the line of fire. If he's alive, he's either with them or he's running. Either way, he's not coming for you. No one is. There's just us. The truth of it settled on her. She was utterly alone. Except for him. What do we do? She asked. We go deeper, he said, standing and kicking dirt over the dying candle. Into the wilderness, where the horses can't follow easy, where they won't expect us to go. He helped her to her feet. Her body screamed in protest. Every muscle was sore, every bruise a fresh agony. He handed her the canteen. Drink. We go now. They left the cave and climbed. The next hours were a blur of pain. Levi led them up a sheer rock face, finding handholds and footholds that seemed invisible to her. He moved with the quiet skill of a man who was more comfortable on a jagged cliff than a town street. He tied his horse at the bottom of the ravine, hiding it in a dense thicket of thorny mesquite. They'll look for tracks. Let them find his. We go on foot, slower, but quieter. They walked through dry riverbeds, their feet sinking into the soft sand. They pushed through thickets of manzanita and scrub oak, the thorns tearing at Clara's ruined dress and at Levi's coat, which she still wore. The sun beat down, a merciless, white-hot eye. Levi was patient. He showed her where to step, how to move without sending rocks tumbling. When she stumbled, his hand was there to steady her. He said little, but his presence was a constant, solid thing beside her. By the time the sun began to dip toward the western horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of red and purple, Clara was moving on pure, numb will. Her feet were blistered and bloody inside her impractical, thin-soled wedding boots. Levi finally found a spot, a small hollow between 3 large boulders, sheltered from the wind and hidden from the trail below. We stop here, he said. He gathered dry mesquite branches and, in a small, rock-lined pit, he built a fire, a small one, just big enough to fight the coming chill, but not big enough to send up a column of smoke. They sat, side by side, watching the flames. The stars came out, thick and bright, a cold, glittering blanket thrown across the black sky. They were sharp, indifferent. Levi passed her the last piece of jerky and a hardtack biscuit from his saddlebag. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the distant cry of a coyote. The exhaustion was a heavy, physical weight. Clara's head nodded. The fire was warm, but the desert night was cold. She shivered. She leaned, just an inch, toward Levi. He was a solid wall of warmth. He did not move, but he did not pull away. Finally, sleep and cold, winning out. Clara pressed closer, resting her head on his shoulder. Her body was desperate for warmth, for one moment of rest. He was stiff for a moment, a rigid line of resistance. Then, with a slow sigh that seemed to drain all the fight out of him, he relaxed, and his arm came around her, pulling her against his side. They lay down by the fire, side by side, his coat and a single blanket from his bedroll covering them both. Their bodies naturally found each other, two exhausted, cold souls seeking simple, uncomplicated warmth. It was not desire. It was survival. It was the most honest touch she had felt in years. She was drifting, caught in the warm, safe place between waking and sleep. Her body finally, at rest. Her cheek was against the rough wool of his shirt. She could feel the slow, steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. Just before sleep took her, she murmured, the words coming from that deep, unguarded place. "I never wanted to marry anyone but you." She felt his chest tighten, his breath catch. He went utterly still, but Levi said nothing. He just held her, staring into the dying embers as the desert night swallowed them whole. Levi's words from the night before, his admission of watching her from the ridge, had settled in her heart like a cold stone. His pain was real, she knew that, but her name had not been in his story. He had grieved for his brother, for the man he had been. He had not, it seemed, grieved for her. She slept, but it was a thin, exhausted sleep. And when she woke, the fire was embers and Levi was gone. A cold panic seized her. He had left her. Again. She sat up, his coat falling from her shoulders, and the icy desert air bit at her skin. Then she saw him, a still figure on the edge of the small clearing, rifle in hand, watching the eastern horizon where the sky was just beginning to pale from black to a deep, bruised purple. He was not a man who slept. He was a man who watched. He heard the shift of her movement and looked back. "Stayed by the fire. It is cold. You should have slept," she said, her voice a croak. "I slept enough," he lied. He walked back to her, his movement stiff. "We need to move. We've been here too long." He gave her the last of the water from his canteen to rinse her mouth. The taste was metallic and precious. She stood, her entire body a symphony of agonizing aches. The blisters on her feet had broken, and every step was a fresh, hot pain. They walked for another day. The land changed, rising from the low desert into dusty, piñon-studded foothills. The sun was a relentless hammer. Clara's lips cracked. The silk of her dress, what was left of it, rubbed her skin raw. Levi's coat was a heavy, suffocating weight, but without it, she knew the sun would have baked her. Levi was a machine. He moved without complaint, his eyes constantly scanning the rocks above, the trail behind. He was looking for two things, pursuit and water. He found neither. By the second afternoon, Clara was lightheaded. She was not a weak woman, but she was not made for this. She stumbled, and this time, her legs would not hold her. She went down on one knee. "Clara," his voice was sharp, I just need a moment," she whispered, her tongue thick. He looked at the sky, his face grim. The sun was tilting west. "We're close. I know a place. You said that yesterday. This one is real." He pulled her to her feet, his grip impatient, but then, for the first time, he did not let her go. He slung his rifle over his shoulder, looped his arm around her waist, and half carried, half dragged her for the last mile. It was a dusty mountain pass, a narrow cut between two towering walls of red rock, and tucked into a fold, almost invisible, was a shack, It was a miserable thing, built of leaning timbers and mud chinking, the roof sagging. "A trapper's," Levi said, letting go of her. He went to the door. A single plank on leather hinges. It was barred from the outside. "Good, no one's home." He kicked the bar loose and shoved the door open. The smell that hit them was of dust, old animal skins, and rodent droppings. "It is shelter," he said, as if daring her to complain. She would have wept with gratitude if she had the moisture. She limped inside. There was a crude fireplace, a three-legged stool, and a bed frame made of rope and timber, piled with dry, rotting skins. Levi went straight to the small pantry. He found a tin of coffee, half a bag of moldy beans, and, miraculously, a full sack of cornmeal. He also found a small, locked chest. He broke it open with the butt of his knife. Inside were 3 boxes of rifle cartridges, a bottle of whiskey, and a dried, withered apple. He tossed the apple to Clara. She bit into it, and the sharp, mealy burst of flavor was the most wonderful thing she had in her life. While she devoured it, Levi worked. He cleared the hearth, built a fire from the trapper's own wood pile, and filled a blackened pot with cornmeal and water from his nearly empty canteen. He found a barrel of stagnant rainwater outside and used it to fill a bucket, which he set near the fire to boil. Clara huddled by the hearth, her hands held out to the first real warmth she had felt in days. The firelight danced on her face, illuminating the exhaustion, the dirt, and the bruise on her cheek. She had pulled his coat off, and she sat there in the ruins of her wedding dress, a tattered, soiled ghost. Levi watched her. He stood in the shadows, his work done for the moment. He watched the firelight catch the auburn glints in her brown hair. He watched her shiver. Even as she bent toward the flames, he saw the line of her throat, the delicate curve of her wrist as she braced herself. He was torn, a deep, primal urge to protect her, to wrap her in blankets and feed her and stand guard at the door, warred with a feeling he had not allowed himself to have in 6 long years. It was desire, hot and sharp, but it was tangled with a terrible shame. She was Clara. She was the girl from his past, the one pure thing he had known, and he was the man who had abandoned her, the man who had come back from the war with a darkness that still clung to him. He wanted her. He wanted to cross the room, kneel before her, and put his head in her lap. He wanted to burn the tattered dress from her body and cover her with his own. He wanted to tell her that he was sorry, that he was a fool, that he had never, not for one day, stopped loving her. He did none of those things. He turned, his movements jerky, and checked his rifle again. Clara watched him in the firelight. He was a creature of shadows, his back to her, his focus on the cold steel of the gun. The silence in the shack was thick, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the rising wind outside. "Levi," she said, her voice stronger now, warmed by the fire and the food. He did not turn. "What? I asked you why you came back. You said it was because I was in trouble." "That is right." "And last night," she pressed, her voice trembling just slightly, "you told me why you left. Because of the war. Because of Jesse." He finally turned, his face unreadable. "What about it? You told me about the soldier you became. You told me about seeing me on the porch." She took a breath. "You never said my name. You never said you left me." His silence was a physical thing. It filled the cabin, heavier than the smoke. He looked at the floor, at the walls, at the fire, anywhere but at her. The shame, which had been a dull ache, was now a fresh, gaping wound. "You said, that night, I never wanted to marry anyone but you." His voice was so low she barely heard it. "I heard you. I was half asleep," she whispered, a flush rising on her cheeks. "You were honest," he countered. "And I've not been—" He walked to the single grimy window and looked out at the pass, though he saw nothing. "It was not just the war, Clara. It was, when I saw you, on that porch, you were whole. You were clean. And I was broken. I was covered in the filth of it. I'd killed men. Clara, not just in battle. I'd killed them when I was angry. I'd killed them because it was easier than letting them live. He turned to face her. The firelight caught the scar on his cheek, the hollowness in his eyes. I did not just think I was not worthy. I knew it. I was poison. I thought, if I touched you, I would ruin you. I thought you would move on. I thought you would find a good man, a man who built things, not a man who tore them down, leaving you. It was the only good thing I had left to give you. It was the only way I knew how to protect you. From me. He had not moved from the window. He looked like a man awaiting a sentence. Clara stood. She crossed the small space between them. She stopped just an arm's length away. You were a fool. Levi Grayson. His head snapped up, a spark of the old Levi in his eyes. You were not poison, she said, her voice fierce. You were my friend. You were my everything. And you left me. You did not protect me. You left me with Arthur. You left me to be sold. Your darkness. I would have taken it. I would have shared it. But you left me alone in mine. She was close now. She put her hand on his chest, over his heart. She could feel it beating, a hard, fast rhythm. I am not that girl on the porch anymore. I am not clean. I am not whole. Look at me. I am ruined. Do not say that, he growled, his hand covering hers, his grip tight. It is true. That is what Arthur called me. That is what the world will call me. A woman, stolen, who spent 2 nights in the wilderness with a man. I do not care what the world says, he said, his voice rough. I do not care about Arthur. Then what do we do? She whispered. We cannot just run forever. They are still out there. His gaze hardened. He was back. The man of action. No, we do not run. He looked down at her hand, still trapped beneath his. We ride. I have an old friend from the army, Josiah Reed. He's a U.S. Marshal in Santa Rosa. It is a 3-day ride from here. If we can get horses, a plan, hope, thin but real. A marshal? Will he help? He owes me his life, Levi said, a grim statement of fact. And I owe him mine. He'll listen. We tell him about Arthur, about the Barrows, about the deal. This is not just you. This is corruption. This is a debt that went bad and turned to murder. He'll help. We can find justice for you. Clara. Justice, she repeated. The word tasted strange. I do not even know what that looks like. It looks like you, free, he said simply. It looks like Arthur Pendleton in a cell. He let go of her hand, the sudden loss of contact leaving her cold. We'll rest tonight. We'll take what food we can. At dawn, we find my horse. And then we find another. They spent the day in the close confines of the shack. They ate the hot cornmeal mush, which tasted like life itself. Levi took the boiled water in his razor and, with a grimace, scraped 6 years of grit and shadow from his jaw. Clara, using the same water, now lukewarm, washed her face and hands. She washed the blood from her lip. Levi found a needle and thread in the trapper's kit, and she sat by the fire, stitching the tears in a ruined dress, turning it from a gown into a functional, if ragged, garment. The intimacy of it was overwhelming. They moved around each other, 2 people who knew each other better than anyone. And not at all. The weather turned as dusk approached. The wind that had been whispering now howled. A hard, cold rain began to lash against the cabin. A downpour, Levi said, checking the door bar. Good, it'll wash our tracks, but it'll make the trail hell. He was right. They set out before dawn, Levi's gelding, which he had retrieved from the ravine, looking worn but steady. He had found a second horse, a mean-eyed mule, in the trapper's lean-to. He put Clara on the gelding and took the mule for himself, loading it with the cornmeal and the borrowed rifle cartridges. The world was a sea of mud. The desert heat of the day before was a memory. Now, it was a biting, pervasive cold. The rain came in sheets, driven by a wind that seemed to want to peel them from their saddles. They rode with their heads down, the landscape a gray, weeping blur. They crossed a river that had, a day before, been a dry bed. It was now a churning, brown torrent. Levi took the horses across one at a time, his face a mask of concentration as the water surged around his legs. By the second day of riding, the rain had stopped, but the sky was a low, bruised, purple-gray. They were high on a narrow ridge, the world falling away on either side into a mist-filled canyon, and then the storm broke. Not with rain, but with light. A bolt of lightning, white-hot and jagged, struck a pinnacle of rock not 100 yards away. The crack of thunder was instantaneous, a physical blow that shook the very ground. Clara's horse reared, screaming. Levi, his face pale in the flash, grabbed her bridle, fighting the animal, his own mule bucking and spinning. "Get off!" he yelled over the rising shriek of the wind. "Get off the horses! The ridge!" He pulled her down. Another bolt struck, this one closer, and the air smelled of ozone and burnt rock. He shoved her toward a shallow overhang, a small cleft in the rock wall of the ridge. "Get in! Get low!" They scrambled into the tiny space, barely big enough for both of them. They were pressed together, shoulder to hip, as the storm unleashed its fury. The lightning was constant, turning the world into a series of terrifying blue-white photographs. The thunder was a cannonade, rolling and echoing from the canyon walls until it felt like the mountains themselves were coming down. Clara was trembling, not just from cold, but from sheer terror. She buried her face in Levi's chest, her hands fisting in his shirt. "Levi!" He wrapped his arms around her, his own body rigid, his gaze fixed on the storm. He was her only anchor in a world that was exploding. "It is all right," he shouted, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "It will pass. It is just noise. It will pass." He held her tight, his own fear for her, for them, a cold knot in his stomach. He was acutely aware of everything, the damp, earthy smell of her hair, the desperate, frantic beat of her heart against his, the softness of her body, even through the layers of wet, cold wool. The storm raged for an hour, and in that hour, pressed together in the cleft of the rock, something shifted. The barriers between them, built of time and pain and guilt, were dissolved by a greater, more immediate force. They were just two people, cold and alive, holding on against the chaos. When the storm finally rumbled away, moving east, it left behind a world that was washed clean, and a silence that was deafening. They did not move for a long time. They were both soaked to the skin, their clothes clinging. "It is over," Levi said finally, his voice hoarse. Clara pulled back, but only an inch. She looked up at him. His face was wet, water dripping from his hair onto her. His eyes, in the strange post-storm light, were dark, and they were fixed on her mouth. "Levi," she whispered. He did not answer. They made camp that night near a lonely watering hole, a small pool of dark water at the base of a cliff, fed by the runoff from the storm. The air was cold, but the sky was clear, the stars brilliant. They built a fire, and Levi set their blankets and his coat to dry. They ate cold cornmeal mixed with water. It was a grim, silent meal. The storm had broken the tension, but it had left behind this new, raw awareness. Clara was sitting on a rock, staring into the flames. She was done. Done being afraid. Done being cold. Done being the victim. She had survived Arthur. She had survived the ambush. She had survived the storm. She looked at Levi, who was cleaning his rifle, his profile hard and perfect in the firelight. She stood up and walked to him. He looked up, wary. "What is it? You hear something?" "No," she said. She knelt in front of him. She reached out and touched the scar on his cheek, her fingers trembling. "I am so tired of being cold. Levi." He froze. His eyes searched hers. He saw the exhaustion, the fear, but he also saw something else, something he had not seen before. Resolve. "Clara," he began, his voice a warning. Do not what?" she whispered. "Do not want, do not feel, do not be alive? I have been a ghost for 6 years. I am done. She leaned in, and she kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was slow and trembling and desperate. It was the kiss of a woman who had been starved, a woman who was staking a claim. Her lips were chapped and cold, but they were his. Levi was rigid. He was a stone. He was the man who was not worthy. He was the poison. His hands, resting on his rifle, clenched. He should push her away. He should tell her she was wrong. He should protect her. But he was also the man who had loved her his entire life. She pulled back, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Please, Levi," she whispered. "Do not leave me alone again." That broke him. The last wall of his defense, the dam of his guilt, it all came crashing down. With a low groan that sounded like a man in agony, he dropped the rifle. His hands came up, not to push her away, but to tangle in her damp hair. He cupped the back of her head, and he kissed her. He kissed her back with all the years of hunger, all the pent-up grief, all the rage, and all the terrible, aching love he had carried. He surrendered. He pulled her to him, his mouth devouring hers. It was not gentle. It was raw. It was a collision. They fell from their knees onto the sandy ground, his body covering hers, their mouths still locked. He pulled his coat from the rock where it was drying. It was still damp, but it was warm from the fire. He spread it on the ground, and he pulled her onto it. His hands were shaking as he worked the crude buttons of her dress, his fingers clumsy. She helped him, her own hands just as desperate, tearing at the buttons of his shirt. They were skin to skin under a thunderous, starry sky. The rain had soaked the earth around them, and the air was cold, but where they touched, they burned. This was not the polite fumbling of a wedding night. This was survival. This was two people, battered and broken, finding the one true living thing left in the world. He made love to her with a reverence that bordered on pain, his movements slow, then urgent. He was worshiping her, and she was healing him. It was grief and hunger, and a love so deep it had survived war and abandonment. It was a desperate, beautiful, and terrible claiming. It was the only thing that made sense. The next morning, the world was quiet. The sun rose into a clear, cold sky. Clara woke first, tangled in Levi's arms, his coat and their blankets. She was warm, and she was terrified. She eased away from him, pulling on her ragged dress. The intimacy of the night before, so raw and necessary, now seemed, in the clear light of day, like a terrible mistake. What had she done? She had turned to him for comfort, and she had taken more. She felt like a burden. Again, she had been Arthur's burden, a thing to be sold, and now she was Levi's, a woman he had to save, and now, a woman he had... He stirred. He was awake. He sat up, his shirt open, and he watched her. His face was unreadable. Clara's throat tightened. "Levi," she began, her voice small. "Last night, He stood, came to her. He did not touch her, not yet. "I am sorry." Her heart sank. "You are sorry?" "I should not have. I took advantage." "No," she said, her head snapping up, her anger returning. "You did not. I came to you, and now you are sorry for it?" "Clara," he said, his voice raw. He reached out, his hand hesitating. "That is not what I mean. I am sorry for all of it, for what you have been through." "I am not something you had to save," she whispered, the tears finally coming. "I am not just a problem. He cupped her face, his thumbs brushing the tears from her cheeks. His touch was firm. He made her look at him. "You were never something I had to save," he told her, his voice soft, but with an intensity that vibrated through her. "You are the one thing I want." She stopped crying. She just looked at him, at the truth in his pale, steady eyes. He meant it. He leaned in, and he kissed her. And this kiss was different. It was not desperate. It was not hungry. It was a promise. The moment was perfect. It was a new beginning. And then it shattered. Levi's head snapped up. His hand dropped from her face. He was looking east, his body instantly tensing. The soldier returning. "What?" Clara asked, turning. "What is it?" He pointed. On the far eastern ridge, miles away, but perfectly clear in the bright morning air. A thin column of smoke was rising. It was not a campfire. It was too precise. "A signal," Levi said, his voice flat and cold. He looked north, and she followed his gaze. On another ridge, a second plume of smoke answered. They were being hunted. The outlaws had not given up. They were closing in. The kiss was a promise. The smoke was a threat. The two worlds collided in an instant, and the threat won. Levi's face hardened, the tenderness of the last 5 seconds evaporating like water on a hot stone. He grabbed his rifle. They are signaling, not searching. They know the area, and they are sweeping it. "How?" Clara asked, her voice trembling, pulling the blankets around her. "How do they know?" "They found the trapper's shack, found our trail. Or they are just smart. They know we are heading north. Santa Rosa is the only real town in that direction." He kicked dirt onto the fire, his movements angry and efficient. "We lost our head start. We have to move." They were on the horses in minutes, the damp blankets tied behind Levi's saddle. The mule was a liability now. Too slow. He had left it at the watering hole. He and Clara rode double on his long-suffering gelding. A harder target to track, but slower. "They are on the ridges," he said, his voice a low growl near her ear. She was seated in front of him, his arms a cage around her. "We stay in the canyons. It is longer, but it is cover." He was no longer the man who had kissed her. He was the soldier. He was grim, silent, and his eyes never stopped moving, scanning the rocks, the sky, the ground. For the first hour, Clara felt the cold dread return. They were being hunted. The moment of peace had been a lie, an illusion. But as the morning wore on, a new feeling settled in. She was not the same woman who had ridden in the wedding wagon. She had survived. She had faced him, and she had faced herself. She was no longer just cargo. She was a passenger. Yes, but she was riding with him, not just being carried. Levi guided the horse into a narrow gorge, the walls rising 100 feet on either side, the path barely wide enough for a single rider. The air was cool and smelled of damp stone. "This is dangerous," Clara whispered, looking up at the high, sharp rim. "They could be up there." "It is the only way through the mesa without being seen," Levi replied, his voice tight. "We are almost to the flatlands. Another hour, and we can make time." He knew this land. She trusted him, but the gorge felt like a trap. The horse's hooves echoed, the sound unnaturally loud. Levi suddenly reined in, his arm tightening around her waist so hard it hurt. "What?" she breathed. "Quiet." He listened, his head cocked, up ahead, around a blind curve. She heard it, the faint, metallic jingle of a spur, the soft huff of a horse. Levi's transformation was terrifying in its speed. He was off the horse before it even stopped, pulling her down with him. He pushed her behind a cluster of boulders. "Stay here. Do not move. Do not make a sound," he whispered. His eyes were not gray. They were black, cold, and utterly flat. He pulled the rifle from its scabbard. "This is not a conversation, understand?" She nodded, her heart hammering. He looked at the gorge wall. "They know this place. They are waiting for us. Or they are just as tired as we are and picked a bad place to rest." He checked his revolver. "It does not matter." He moved. Not like a man, but like a shadow. He pressed himself against the rock wall, his rifle up, and began to edge forward, one slow, silent step at a time, toward the bend. Clara held her breath. She was alone, hidden, but she could see nothing. She heard only the sound of her own blood rushing in her ears. A shout. "He is here! I hear him!" The gorge exploded with gunfire. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks, the sound a sharp, terrifying wing that echoed a dozen times. Levi's horse screamed and bolted, running back the way they had come, taking their blankets and their food. Levi! Clara screamed, her promise to stay silent forgotten. Get back! He roared. She saw him. He was not against the wall. He was in the open, firing his rifle, advancing toward the bend. He was a target. A man appeared on the ridge above, leaning over, aiming a rifle down at Levi. Above you! Clara shrieked. Levi did not look. He fired twice. Rapid click toward the bend, then dove behind a low, flat rock as the man on the ridge fired. The bullet sparked where Levi had been a second before. He was pinned. Clara looked around, frantic. Her eyes landed on the horse. Now 50 yards down the canyon, its reins tangled in a patch of thorny scrub. It was trying to pull free. She ran, bent double, the sound of the guns deafening. She heard Levi shout her name, a sound of pure fury. She ignored him. She reached the horse, her hands shaking, and untangled the reins. She fumbled with the saddlebag. Levi's other pistol. It was not there. Of course it was not. But his shotgun was, still in its scabbard on the saddle. She pulled. It was heavy, long, and awkward. She grabbed it, and a handful of shells from the bag, and ran back. Clara! Get down! She dove behind the same cluster of rocks where he had left her. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely open the breech. She had seen her father do this. She had seen Levi do this, years ago, hunting rabbits. She jammed 2 shells in, her fingers clumsy and raw. Levi! She shouted. He was still behind his rock, firing his rifle sparingly. What? I have the shotgun. There was a pause. Then, his voice, different, tighter. The man on the ridge, can you see him? She peeked over the rock. The man was still there, trying to get a clear shot. Yes, when I move, you shoot, he commanded. Do not aim, just point. Point at him and pull both triggers. Both. Now! Levi broke from cover. He ran straight at the bend, his revolver in his hand, roaring a sound that was not a word, but a pure, primal expression of violence. 2 men came around the bend, rifles raised. They had been trying to flank him. They had not expected a charge. Levi fired. The first man went down, clutching his chest. The man on the ridge leaned over, aiming at Levi's exposed back. Now, Clara! Clara stood. She raised the heavy shotgun. It was too long, too heavy. She pointed it up at the man, a dark shape against the bright sky, and pulled both triggers. The recoil was a mule kick. It slammed her back against the rocks, knocking the wind from her and sending her to her knees. The blast was a physical thing, a wall of sound that left her ears ringing. But she saw the man. He did not just fall. He was thrown backward, vanishing from the ridge. The gorge was silent. The silence was worse than the noise. It was thick, heavy, and smelled of sulfur. Clara? Levi's voice was hoarse. I am here, she whispered, her arms and shoulder on fire. She dropped the shotgun. He appeared from around the bend. He was not hurt. His face was a mask of soot and grim concentration. He looked at her, then up at the ridge, then at the 2 dead men in the path. He walked to her. He did not help her up. He stood over her, his chest heaving. I told you, he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. To stay. You were going to die, she said, her voice trembling, but not with fear, with rage. You were pinned. He was above you. That was my fight. No, she said, pushing herself to her feet. It is not anymore. It is our fight. You said it. Just us. He looked at her, his eyes taking in the shotgun, the defiance on her soot-streaked face. The soldier in him was furious. The man was something else. He was awed. He turned away, walking to the bodies. He checked them, his movements clinical. He took their guns, their ammunition, and a half-full canteen. There were 3, he said. What? I heard 3 horses. There's one still out there. Or he was on the ridge. He looked up. I have to check. I will come. No, you will stay with the horse. You will reload that shotgun, and you will not move. This time, I mean it. He climbed the rock face, moving with a speed that defied the terrain. He was gone for 10 minutes. Clara's hands, slick with sweat, fumbled with the shells. She got them in. She sat on the rock, the heavy gun across her knees, and she waited. She heard a single shot. Her heart stopped. Then, 5 minutes later, Levi reappeared, sliding down the loose scree. He was not hurt. He was not dead, Levi said, his face blank. His legs were shattered. He was trying to crawl for his rifle. Clara looked at him. He had gone up there and... "You!" "I did what was needed," he said, cutting her off. "War taught me that. You do not leave an enemy at your back, and you do not leave a man to suffer." He had executed him. A man she had shot. The violence of it, the cold, hard necessity, washed over her. She felt sick. Her body started to shake, the adrenaline draining away, leaving her weak and cold. "We have to bury them," she said, her voice a thin whisper. Levi looked at her, surprised. "Bury them? They are outlaws. They are men. We killed them. We cannot just leave them." "Not like this." He studied her face. He saw the shock, the trauma, but he did not see fear. He saw a deep, aching sadness, a strength that was different from his, but just as real. "All right," he said, his voice softening. "We will bury them." It was a grim, terrible task. They could not dig graves in the rocky soil. They covered the bodies with stones, creating 3 low cairns in the shade of the gorge wall. It took over an hour. Clara's hands were bleeding by the time they finished, her nails torn. She stood over the last grave, the one belonging to the man she had shot. Her hands were trembling so violently she could not make them stop. She was not crying. She was hollow. Levi came to stand beside her. He did not touch her. "I killed him," she said to the rocks. "You saved me," he replied. "It felt..." She shook her head, unable to find the word. "It felt powerful and terrible. I see it now. What you said, the darkness, the things you did." She turned to look at him. Her eyes were clear. I am not afraid of it. Levi, I am not afraid of you. I share it now. This blood, it is on my hands, too." He looked at their joined reflection in her gaze. He saw his own darkness, the thing he had tried to hide from her, and he saw it mirrored. He saw that she was right. She was not flinching. She was accepting it, and in that acceptance, he felt a part of his own fractured soul settle. He took her bleeding hand. He unwrapped his kerchief, the one he had not used as a mask, and gently wrapped it around her torn palms. "Then let's go," he said. "Let's go finish this." They arrived in Santa Rosa 2 days later, not as heroes, but as survivors. They were filthy, gaunt, and rode a horse that looked half dead. The town was a collection of adobe buildings, a dusty main street, and the low, false front of a U-Taas, marshal's office. Levi dismounted, his body so stiff he almost fell. He helped Clara down, and for a moment, they just leaned against each other, 2 exhausted souls. In the middle of the street, the door of the marshal's office opened. A man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and a star was pinned to his vest. He was a black man, his face weathered, his eyes sharp and intelligent. He squinted at the 2 figures. Levi Grayson, is that you, you son of a snake? I thought you were dead." "Josiah," Levi breathed, a small, pained smile touching his lips. "It is good to see you." The marshal, Josiah Reed, looked from Levi to Clara, his expression shifting from surprise to a guarded, professional assessment. He took in Levi's guns, the tattered state of Clara's dress, the exhaustion, and the shared, desperate look in their eyes. "Get in," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Get in, before you fall over, and tell me what kind of trouble you have dragged to my doorstep." Inside the cool, dark office, Josiah gave them water. He listened. He did not interrupt. Clara, her voice hoarse, told him everything. She started with the wedding wagon, her voice gaining strength as she spoke of the debts, the ambush, the barrows. Levi sat beside her. his hand resting on his knee, his gaze fixed on his friend, corroborating with a nod, or a single, grim word. When she finished, there was a long silence. Josiah leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "That is a hell of a story. Miss Monroe, Arthur Pendleton, the Barrow Gang, an ambush, and my old friend here, rising from the dead to save you. It is the truth," Clara said, her chin high. "I am sure you believe it is," Josiah said, not unkindly. "But what you have given me is a story. I'm a marshal. I need proof. I cannot just ride out and arrest a man like Pendleton. He is a prominent citizen. He just lost his stepdaughter, his wagon, his men. For all I know, you," he nodded at Levi, "are the one who attacked him." "Josiah," Levi growled. "I know you. Levi, I know what you are, and I know what you are capable of. But I do not know this." He leaned forward. "You are asking me to start a war with the Barrows and with the richest merchant in Santa Fe, all on your word." "He is not the richest," Clara interjected. "He is a debtor. He is a gambler. He is a liar." "Prove it," Josiah said simply. "We cannot." Clara's voice broke. She stood up, her fists clenched. We have been running. We have been fighting for our lives. We have nothing." She looked at the marshal, her eyes pleading. "Please, I am begging you. He will not stop. They will not stop. They are still out there. They are hunting us. You have to protect us." Josiah Reed looked at her, his gaze softening. He looked at the torn dress, the bruises, the raw hope in her eyes. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I cannot arrest him. Not yet, but I cannot turn you out. Not in this state." He looked at Levi. "You always did bring me the worst kind of trouble." He stood. "All right, I will give you 3 days. 3 days. You stay here. I will put you up in the boarding house, under my protection. You find me one piece of solid proof, a ledger, a witness, something more than a story. You give me that, and I will rain hell down on every last one of them. But 3 days. Levi, then my hands are tied. Deal?" "Deal," Levi said. The boarding house was a clean, small room with a single iron-frame bed and a porcelain wash basin. It felt like a palace. While Levi went to a general store with the last of his money to buy a new shirt and a bar of lye soap, Clara washed. She scrubbed the soot, the blood, and the trail from her skin. She washed her hair. She felt almost human. When Levi returned, he brought her a simple, blue calico dress. "It is all I could get," he murmured, leaving it on the bed, his back to her. She changed. The simple, clean fabric a relief against her clean skin. The wedding dress, the symbol of her old life. She left in a heap in the corner. They were in a town, under a marshal's protection, but they were not safe. The window of their small room looked out onto the main street, and every shadow, every passing rider, made them jump. "We have to get into the mercantile," Levi said. He was standing at the window, watching the street. "You said he has an office here, in Santa Rosa, a satellite," Clara said, combing her wet hair with her fingers. He kept ledgers. He was meticulous. He said, "The numbers never lie, Clara. Then we will find his numbers." Levi said, "That night, they moved. Santa Rosa was a town that slept. At 2 a.m, Levi and Clara slipped out of the boarding house. The mercantile was a dark, 2-story building on the main street. Levi picked the back lock with a piece of wire from his kit. The office smelled of tobacco and leather. It was neat, Arthur's office. Clara felt a wave of nausea. "Where?" Levi whispered. "The desk, or the safe." The desk was locked. Levi broke it open with his knife. Papers, shipping manifests. Nothing. "The safe," Clara said, pointing to a large, black iron box in the corner. "I cannot open that," Levi said. "You do not have to." Clara went to the large, framed portrait of her stepfather on the wall. She lifted it. Behind it, a small, loose nailed piece of wood. She pulled it free. Tucked in the dark, dusty space was a small, leather-bound book. His private ledger, she whispered. He thought I did not know. They did not wait. They took the book and slipped back into the night. They did not go to the marshal. They went back to their room, by the light of a single lamp. They opened the book. It was all there, names, dates, figures. But it was in a code. 10 barrels of flour to be gang. Payment for transport. $5,000. Final dowry payment. He was not just paying them off, Levi said, his finger tracing the line. He was in business with them. He was using them to move his goods, or their goods. Stolen goods. This is it, Clara breathed. This is the proof. A shadow fell under their door. Levi was on his feet, his gun in his hand. In a heartbeat, he put a finger to his lips. A soft knock. Miss Monroe, Clara. Clara's blood ran cold. She knew that voice. Levi opened the door. Arthur Pendleton stood in the hallway. He was not dressed in his fine suits. He was wearing trail clothes. He was gaunt, and he was not alone. 2 hard-faced men in the Barrow Gang's colors, stood behind him. Clara, Arthur said, his voice a dry rasp. You are alive. He tried to smile, a ghastly pulling of his lips. I've been looking for you. I was worried. You were worried, Clara said, her voice flat. You left me to die. You left me to burn. No, he said, a note of panic in his voice. It was a misunderstanding. The Barrows, they got greedy. It was not, I never meant for... You meant for them to take me. Clara said, take me, take the dowry, and you would be free. Arthur's face changed. The false concern dropped away, leaving the mean, small man she had always known. He saw Levi, standing in the shadows by the bed, the ledger in his hand. You, he sneered at Clara. You always were ungrateful. I gave you everything, a name, a home, and you run off with this killer, nothing. Get out, Arthur, Levi said, his voice deadly. Or what? Arthur laughed, emboldened by his men. You will shoot me? In a marshal's town? You ruined her. He looked at Clara, his eyes full of venom. He took you, did not he? In the wilderness, you are used. You are soiled. No one will have you now. You are worth nothing. Levi moved. He was a blur. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his hand lashing out. He did not punch Arthur. He grabbed him by the throat, slamming him against the wall. Arthur's men drew their guns, but Levi was faster. The barrel of his revolver was pressed under Arthur's chin before they could even aim. Stop, Levi whispered, his voice shaking with a rage that was almost biblical. Or I will paint this wall with him. The 2 outlaws froze. Levi's thumb cocked the hammer. Arthur's eyes went wide, his face turning a deep, mottled red. He clawed at Levi's wrist. Levi, Clara said, her voice sharp, but calm. No, not like this. Levi's gaze was fixed on Arthur. He was back in the gorge. He was back in the war. This was just another man who needed killing. He is not worth it, Clara said, stepping forward. She put her hand on Levi's arm. He is not worth you. Let the marshal handle him. For a long second, nothing happened. The standoff held. Then, slowly, the hammer on Levi's pistol came down. He did not release Arthur. He just held him. You are right, he said. He looked at Arthur, his eyes full of a cold, pure contempt. He is nothing. He shoved Arthur toward the 2 men. Get out. Get out of this town. Because if the marshal does not hang you, I will find you. And I will. Arthur, gasping, stumbled back, and he and his men fled down the hall. The door closed. The room was silent. Clara let out the breath she had been holding. She turned to Levi. He was standing by the door, his entire body trembling with the adrenaline of the kill he had denied himself. Clara began, but her voice broke. The words, used, soiled, nothing. They echoed in the room. She had been so strong. In the gorge, in the office, but he had found the one crack in her armor. She broke, the tears she had refused to shed, the terror she had held at bay. It all came rushing up. A low, wounded sound tore from her throat, and she covered her face. They think I am nothing. Levy was at her side in an instant. He did not hesitate. He pulled her into his arms, his own body still trembling. He held her fiercely, as if he could absorb her pain, as if he could shield her from the world with his own body. He held her as she wept, his hand stroking her hair. "No," he whispered, his voice raw. "No." He held her face, tilting it up to his. "He is the nothing, not you." He looked at her, his eyes burning with a new, fierce light. To hell with him, to hell with all of them. To hell with the past, to hell with shame. He leaned his forehead against hers. "If they think we are nothing, then let's be nothing together. No past, no shame, just us." She looked at him, her vision blurred by tears. "Just us." He kissed her. He kissed her like a drowning man finding air. It was not the desperate kiss of the trail. It was not the tender kiss of the morning. This was something else. This was a claiming. This was two broken, ruined people, declared nothing by the world, forging a new world just for them. He kissed the tears from her cheeks. He kissed the bruise that was still a faint shadow on her skin. He kissed her mouth, her throat, the hollow of her neck. He lifted her, his arms strong, and carried her to the bed. He laid her down, and he did not take, he worshipped. His hands, his mouth. They found every scar, every old pain, every place the world had tried to break her. He moved over her, reverent, his passion a raw, healing thing. He was unmaking her. He was unmaking the Clara that Arthur had owned, the Clara that had been sold, the Clara that was soiled, and in her place, he was finding her, just her, and she, in turn, did the same for him. She held him. She matched his passion. Her hands learning the scars on his back, his arms, the roadmap of the war he had survived. It was not lovemaking. It was a baptism, a raw and holy and reverent fire. And in it, they burned away everything until there was truly just us. The first sound was not a gunshot. It was a scream. A single, high, terrified woman's wail, cut short. It came in the pre-dawn gray. The moment just before the sun, when the world was pale and held its breath. Levi was on his feet before the scream ended, his gun in his hand, his body instinctively moving. The soldier awakened. He was dressed, as he had slept that way. But Clara was in a thin nightgown, startled from the deep. Safe sleep she had finally found in his arms. "What?" she whispered, her heart leaping. "Get dressed," Levi said, his voice flat, already cold. He was at the window. "Now?" Then the gunshot started, not one, but a volley. A dozen rifles firing at once. A declaration of war. Glass shattered somewhere down the street. Men shouted. Horses screamed. "They are here," Clara said, her hands shaking as she fumbled for the calico dress. It was not a question. "They did not wait," Levi said, grabbing the ledger from the table. "They are not just hitting the marshal. They are hitting the whole town." He shoved the ledger into his shirt, grabbed his rifle, and checked his revolver. "Stay here. Lock the door." "No," Clara said. She was buttoning the dress, her fingers finally working. I am not hiding. I am not waiting to be saved. We are in this. Just us." She picked up the revolver he had bought her, the one from the general store. It felt heavy, cold, and right. Levi looked at her. The fear was in her eyes, but it was eclipsed by a cold, hard fire he recognized. It was the same fire he had seen in the gorge. He nodded. "Then stay behind me." They ran from the room and down the stairs. The boarding house owner was cowering in the hallway, a large woman in a nightcap, holding a broom. They did not stop. They burst onto the street. It was chaos. Dawn was just breaking. and the main street of Santa Rosa was a vision of hell. Men on horseback, their faces covered by kerchiefs, were riding up and down the street, firing into windows, at doors. A horse, reins broken, galloped past, wild-eyed with panic. Smoke was already beginning to cloud the air, though from where, Clara could not tell. "The marshal's office!" Levi roared. Grabbing her hand, they ran, heads down, as bullets whined past. The air smelled of sulfur and fear. They were halfway across the street when the door to the marshal's office burst open. Josiah Reed stepped out, his large frame filling the doorway, a double-barreled shotgun in his hands. He was a rock in the middle of the chaos. "Get back, you sons of—" he bellowed. He saw Levi and Clara sprinting toward him. His face registered surprise, then anger. "Levi, get the girl inside." A rider on a black horse, a man Clara recognized from Arthur's hallway, raised his rifle. He was aiming at Levi. "Josiah, no!" Levi shouted, raising his own rifle, but the marshal was faster. Josiah shoved Levi and Clara toward the door, raised his shotgun, and fired. The blast took the rider from his horse, but the rider had fired too. Josiah staggered. He looked down at his chest, a strange, surprised expression on his face. A dark, spreading stain was blooming on his white shirt, just below the star. "Oh," he said. He fell. Levi roared, a sound of pure, animalistic grief. He grabbed Clara, shoved her through the door, and then turned, his rifle at his shoulder, firing 3 times. Fast, working the lever, dropping the man who had shot the marshal, and the man beside him. He grabbed Josiah by the vest and dragged him inside, kicking the door shut with his boot. "Clara, the bar! Bar the door!" She fumbled with the heavy oak beam, her hands slick with sweat, and dropped it into the iron brackets. The office was suddenly, blessedly, quiet, save for the muffled sounds of the war outside and the wet, terrible sound of Josiah Reed, gasping for air on his own floor. "Josphia," Levi whispered, kneeling beside his friend. He tore the shirt open. The wound was in the center of his chest. It was bad. It was mortal. "Well, hell, Levi," Josiah coughed, a spray of blood on his lips. You always were, in the middle of it." "Be quiet," Levi said, his voice thick. "Clara, find bandages, whiskey, anything. Do not bother." Josiah gasped. He grabbed Levi's wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. They came for you, for the ledger." "They came for the town," Levi said, his voice raw. "They came. For you," Josiah repeated. "Pendleton, he has friends." The front of the office exploded in a shower of wood splinters as a half-dozen bullets hammered the door in the window frame. Levi was on his feet, his grief vanishing, replaced by the cold, clear mind of the soldier. He pulled Clara down. "Get behind the desk. Load. You just load. You do not stop." He pushed the heavy desk, scraping it across the floor, until it formed a barricade in front of the window. He grabbed a rifle from the rack on the wall. "They have rifles in here. All my children," Josiah whispered from the floor. "Clara," Levi commanded, his voice the only solid thing in the world. "The rifle's on the wall. The ammunition is in the bottom drawer of that cabinet. Fill your apron. Bring them here." She moved. Her body was on fire with adrenaline. She was not afraid. She was focused. She found the boxes of shells. She found 4 more rifles. She piled them behind the desk where Levi had taken cover. "Load them all," he said. He peeked over the top of the desk. "They are in the street. 4, 5, more across, on the roof." "Levi," Josiah called, his voice weaker. Levi fired. The rifle's report in the small room was deafening. He worked the lever, fired again. "I am here. The town—" Josiah coughed. "They are sheep." "Not all of them," Levi said. A bullet smashed the lamp on the wall. He did not flinch. He fired again. "Just load. Clara, load!" Clara's hands were a blur. She had never loaded a rifle so fast in her life. Her fingers fumbled. The brass shells were slick. She cut her thumb on the loading gate of a Winchester. She did not feel it. She just saw the blood. Her blood. It mixed with the gun oil. She finished loading the rifle and passed it to Levi. He took it, passed her his empty one, and kept firing. He was a machine. He was calm. He was the man who had survived the war. He was not aiming at the mass. He was aiming at the men. One shot, one man. He was methodical. Smoke filled the office, thick and acrid. It burned her eyes, her lungs. Outside, the smoke from the street was worse. They had set a building on fire, the assay office. The world was turning to smoke and noise. Clara reloaded. Her hands were raw. The cut on her thumb was deep, and now every shell she touched, every rifle she loaded, was slick with her own blood. She worked, tears of pure, stinging smoke streaming down her face. She passed Levi a loaded rifle. He passed her an empty one. The rhythm was their life. "He is in the alley," Levi muttered, his gaze fixed. "The back. Damn it." Clara peeked over the desk. In the chaos, she saw a wagon. A familiar wagon. It was not a farm wagon. It was a merchant's wagon. Fast, with good horses, and it was loaded with chests. Her stepfather's wagon. "Arthur," she breathed. He was fleeing. He was not just fleeing. He was taking his gold. He was taking the blood money he had made with the Barrows, the money that had cost all of this. And he was saving himself. Rage, cold and pure, unlike anything she had ever felt, washed over her. It was colder than the gorge. It was hotter than the fire. "He is leaving," she said. "Let him go," Levi snapped, firing again. "He is not our problem. He is my problem." She stood up. She still had the revolver tucked into the waistband of her dress. "Clara, get down. You have 5 rifles loaded," she said, her voice a stranger's. "That is 5 minutes." "I will be back." "Clara, no!" But she was already gone. She ran to the back door of the marshal's office, unbarred it, and slipped into the alley. The alley was chaos, but a different kind. Stragglers, outlaws, were using it to move between streets, but farther down, where it opened onto the plains. She saw him. Arthur Pendleton was lashing his horses, his face a mask of pale, sweating terror. His fine coat was gone. His suspenders hung at his sides. He looked small. "Arthur!" she screamed. Her voice, sharp as a bullet, cut through his panic. He turned, his eyes wide. He saw her. "Clara!" he gasped, a strange, terrible relief on his face. "Thank God! Help me! The savages! They are... We must go!" He reached for her, to pull her up onto the wagon. She did not move. She stood, 10 feet away, the revolver in her hand, hanging at her side. You are leaving," she said. "Of course, the town is lost. Come, girl, come. We can go to San Francisco. Start again." "Start what again?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Another life built on lies? On my life?" His face changed. He saw the gun. He saw her eyes. The desperation turned, as it always did, to venom. You ungrateful child. After all, You did nothing," Clara said, and the words were a sentence. You took my father's store. You took my mother's dignity. You took my name, and you sold it. You tried to sell me. It was business," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "It was survival. You would not understand. And look at you. Look at what you are, running around with him, that killer. You are ruined. You are nothing. You are used goods." "Clara!" She raised the pistol. She aimed it, not at his head, but at his heart. Her hand was steady. Her blood dripped from her cut thumb onto the grip. Arthur's face went white. He raised his hands. No, Clara, please. I am your stepfather. I raised you." She looked at him, the man who had haunted her nightmares, the man who had held her future in his soft, ringed hands. He was just a coward. He was a thief. He was, as Levi had said, nothing. "No," she said. Her voice was flat. You did not raise me. You buried me. She cocked the hammer. You are not worth the bullet, she whispered. You are not worth the powder. She lowered the gun. Get out. Run. Go to San Francisco. Go to hell. It does not matter. But you are disowned. I am no longer your daughter. I am no longer a Pendleton. I am no longer a Monroe. Even I am free of you. She turned her back on him. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. Every instinct screamed that he would shoot her in the back, but she knew he would not. He was a coward. She walked away, not looking back. She heard the frantic crack of his whip, the rattle of the wagon as it fled. She walked back into the marshal's office. She found Levi kneeling by Josiah. The marshal was going. His breathing was a shallow, wet rattle. The fighting outside had quieted, the main force of the outlaws having moved down the street. Levi, Josiah whispered. He was looking at Clara. He saw her, the blood on her hands, the revolver in her belt, the new, hard piece in her eyes. He smiled, a bloody grimace. Good girl, he managed. He looked at Levi. They will break. They are. Rabble, not soldiers. I know, Levi said, his hand resting on his friend's shoulder. The town needs. Josiah's hand fumbled at his chest. He was trying to unpin his star. His fingers were too weak. Levi, his eyes blurred, helped him. He unpinned the star. Josiah held it, the silver light catching in his dying eyes. It is heavy. Levi, you were a good soldier. Be a better man. He pressed the star into Levi's hand. Deputize, you son of a snake. Now, save my town. His hand went slack, his eyes closed. Josiah Reed was dead. Levi knelt there, the star digging into his palm, the weight of it, the weight of his friend's last words. He looked at Clara. She was looking at him, not with pity, but with a fierce, terrible expectation. He stood. He pinned the star to his own chest. It felt cold, it felt wrong, and it felt right. He turned to the door. Clara, stay here. Watch the back. No, she said, picking up a rifle. We go together. He looked at her, at the bloody-handed woman who had faced her own demons and won. He nodded. Together. He kicked the door open. The street was a disaster. Smoke was everywhere. The assay office was a roaring inferno. But the outlaws, they were not a charging force. They were a scattered mob, looting, leaderless. Levi stepped out onto the porch. All right, you bastards, he roared, his voice carrying over the din. You wanted a fight. You got one. He fired. A man who was trying to drag a screaming woman from the dress shop fell. A blacksmith, a huge man with a beard, peeked out from his shop, a hunting rifle in his hand. He saw Levi, saw the star. He saw the dead outlaw. Marshal, he called. Close enough, Levi yelled. You with me? The blacksmith nodded, a grim smile. He stepped out. Amos, Jed, get out here. The marshal's got a spine. A few brave townsfolk, a few men who had been hiding, who had been fighting their own small, desperate battles, emerged. They saw Levi. They saw the star. They saw a leader. We drive them, Levi commanded, his voice the one he had used in the war. We drive them south. No mercy. No quarter. This is our town. He began to advance. Clara was at his side, her rifle up. The blacksmith was on his other. 2 more men joined, then 3 more. They moved down the street, a small, angry wedge of justice. They drove the remaining outlaws out. It was not a battle. It was a purge. The outlaws, disorganized, drunk on stolen whiskey and violence, broke. They ran. They got on their horses and they fled, leaving their dead and their wounded behind. The fight moved, block by block, until it reached the edge of town. The last of the riders vanished into the smoke and dust. The town was quiet. The silence was eerie, broken only by the roar of fire and the sound of someone, somewhere, sobbing. It is over, the blacksmith said, lowering his rifle. Levi looked around. The mercantile. Clara's mercantile, the one with Arthur's office. It was on fire. The outlaws, in their retreat, had torched it. No, Clara whispered, watching the building that held her childhood memories go up in smoke. A man stumbled out of the smoke, his arm bleeding. It was one of the townsfolk. Marshall, Flint, the new leader. He is in there. He grabbed Miss Monroe. Levi's blood went cold. He turned. Clara was not at his side. She had been, just a second ago. He saw her. She was not a hostage. She had gone toward the mercantile, drawn by the flames, by the final, burning end of her past. And a man, a new man, one Levi did not recognize, but who had the bearing of a leader, had stepped from the alley. He had seen Clara, dazed, watching the fire. He had grabbed her. He had dragged her into the burning building. Levi did not think. He ran. "Levi!" the blacksmith shouted. "The roof! It is going!" Levi did not hear him. He crashed through the doors of the mercantile. Inside, it was an inferno. The air was orange, thick and unbreathable. Smoke burned his lungs. "Clara!" Here, he saw them, through the flames, near the back. The man, Flint, had Clara in a headlock, a revolver to her temple. "One more step! Marshall!" Flint screamed, his eyes wild with the fire and with madness. "One more step, and she dies." "Let her go," Levi said, his voice a low, terrifying calm. He advanced, his own revolver in his hand. "I said stop." "You came into my town," Levi said, walking steadily forward. "You killed my friend." "She is worth more alive," Flint shouted, dragging Clara back. "A trade. Me and her, for your life." The roof groaned. A high, terrible, screaming sound. A beam, burning, crashed down between them. Flint flinched. His grip on Clara loosened, just for a fraction of a second. It was all Levi needed. He did not aim for Flint. He aimed for the stack of crates beside him. He fired. The crates, full of God knows what, splintered. Flint was startled. Turning toward the noise, Levi dove, rolling under the fallen beam. Coming up just as Flint turned back, Clara, in that moment, acted. She slammed her heel down on Flint's instep, and she bit his arm, the one holding the gun, with all the feral strength she had. He screamed, his hand opening. Levi fired. The shot was deafening. Flint was thrown backward into a wall of flame, his eyes wide with the final surprise. The entire building shuddered. The roof was collapsing. "Levi!" He grabbed her. He did not say a word. He threw her over his shoulder. His arm clamped around her legs. And he ran. He ran through the wall of smoke, through the curtain of fire at the doorway. He crashed through, tumbling onto the ash-covered street, rolling, covering her body with his own as the mercantile, with a sound like a dying giant's sigh, collapsed in on itself. He lay on top of her, shielding her, his body heaving as he coughed, trying to get the smoke from his lungs. The street was silent. The fire was burning. The battle was done. He pushed himself up, his hands on either side of her head. He looked down at her. Her face was streaked with soot. Her hair was singed. She was coughing, her eyes wide and full of tears. But she was alive. She was here. He clutched her face, his hands shaking, his entire body trembling with the adrenaline, with the terror of the last 2 minutes. He looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, like he was memorizing her. He leaned down, and he kissed her. He kissed her like it was the last thing he would ever do, like she was the only thing in the world. It was a kiss of ash, and smoke, and gunpowder, and a love that was so fierce it defied the death they had just escaped. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. "I would have ridden through hell for you," he whispered, his voice a raw, broken thing. Clara, trembling, smoke-streaked, and alive, smiled. The tears cut clean paths through the soot on her cheeks. "You already did. 6 weeks." The land had not changed, but their world had. 6 weeks had passed since the fire, since the smoke, since the blood had dried on the streets of Santa Rosa. 6 weeks since Marshal Josiah Reed had been buried on the hill, his borrowed star laid to rest with him. Levi had worn the star for 2 days, 2 days of organizing the townsfolk, of burying the dead, both theirs and the outlaws, and of establishing a new, raw order. He had taken Clara's testimony, and the ledgers, and the word of the blacksmith, and he had written a final report. He'd sent it all by rider to the territorial governor in Santa Fe. Then, on the third day, he had taken the star from his shirt. He'd looked at it, heavy and cold in his hand. The blacksmith, Amos, had come to him. We're beholden. Marshal Grayson, the town. We'd be honored if you'd stay. We need a man like you." Levi had looked at Clara, who was standing by the ruins of the mercantile, her face pale, her hands still bandaged. He looked back at the blacksmith, at the town that was already beginning to nail new boards over bullet holes. "I'm not a marshal," he'd said, his voice rough. "And I'm no man for a town." He had laid the star on the desk in the office, the desk that still bore the scars of the fight. "Find a good man, a man who builds." He had taken Clara's hand, and they had walked away. He'd bought 2 good horses, a pack mule, a tent, an axe, and a rifle, and they had ridden north, leaving Santa Rosa, and the ghosts behind them. Now, they lived in a quiet cabin nestled near a river bend. It was an old place, abandoned by a trapper years before, but the stone hearth was sound and the roof was solid. The river, clear and cold, provided water, and the high-walled canyon gave them shelter and privacy. They were 2 days' ride from any settlement, and that felt, to both of them, just about right. Peace was a strange, new garment. It did not fit easily. At first, they had worked in silence, the shock of what they had survived hanging between them like a physical presence. They were rebuilding, not just a life, but their very souls, and they did it with their hands. Levi was a creature of movement. He rose before the sun, his body still wired for war. He would chop wood, the rhythmic thunk of the axe against pine the only sound in the canyon. He mended the rotten fences, his scarred hands working with a quick, efficient grace. He hunted, returning not with the grimness of a soldier, but with the quiet satisfaction of a provider. A rabbit or 2 for the pot. Clara, in turn, claimed the land. She found a small, fallow patch near the river, and with a spade Levi had bought, she turned the soil. She planted the beans and corn he'd packed. She found 2 wild, half-starved goats wandering the canyon, a nanny and a kid. It took her a week, but she lured them in. Now, they had milk. She was, piece by piece, building a home. They worked side by side. There was a comfort in the shared labor, a wordless communication. When a fence post was too heavy, he was there to take the weight. When he came in, his shirt dark with sweat, she had water from the river, cool in a tin cup, waiting for him. One afternoon, Levi returned from a ride. He had not gone hunting. He had gone back to Santa Rosa. Clara was scrubbing the floor of the cabin when he rode in. She came out, wiping her hands on her apron, a sudden, cold fear in her stomach. "What is it? What's wrong?" He said nothing. He dismounted and went to his saddlebags. From them, he pulled a burlap sack. He upended it, and a half-dozen burned, water-warped, smoke-stained books tumbled to the ground. She recognized the spine of one, a book of poetry her mother had loved. I went back," he said, his voice low, as if ashamed. "To the mercantile. The ashes, they were cold. I found these in the rubble of the office. They were under the safe." Clara knelt. She touched the cover of one, her fingers tracing the warped, bubbled leather. She did not cry. She had no tears left for that place. But a part of her she thought was dead, the part that loved the written word, that loved the girl she had been, stirred. "They are ruined," she whispered. "No," he said, kneeling beside her. "They are just hurt." She looked at him. The man who had killed, who had fought, who had ridden through hell. He had ridden for 2 days to salvage a handful of burned books. She did not say anything. She just gathered them up, one by one, and took them inside. She laid them by the fire to dry, the pages stiff and smelling of ash. For the next week, Levi was busy. In the evenings, when the light failed, he sat outside the cabin with his knife and the axe. And he worked. He was shaping wood. He took 2 pine planks he had salvaged from a floodplain, and he began to carve. On the 7th day, he brought it inside. It was a bookshelf. It was not fine. It was rough, the wood still pale, and it listed slightly to the left. But the joints were strong, and he had sanded the shelves with a piece of sandstone until they were smooth. He mounted it on the wall beside the hearth, the warmest, driest place in the cabin. Clara watched him. When he was done, he stepped back. It is a place for them. She took the first book, the book of poetry, and she set it on the shelf. Then the next, and the next. They were only 6 books, but they filled the space. She turned to him. "Thank you, Levi." "It needed doing," he muttered, turning away, embarrassed by the gentleness of the act. But later that night, as she sat mending his shirt, she would look up at the shelf, and he would look up at it, and a new, quiet thread was woven between them. They were not, however, saints. They were 2 real, broken people, and the peace was often punctured by the small, sharp frictions of life. "That is the 6th cup of coffee you have had," Clara said one morning. The air was cold, and a late frost had settled on the ground. "It is cold," Levi replied, not looking at her, pouring the thick, black liquid into his cup. "It is not that cold. You drink it like water. You will not sleep for a week, and it is the last of the beans." "I will ride to town," he snapped, the old defensiveness rising, "and be gone for 4 days, for coffee, when the goats need a new pen and the roof is leaking." He slammed the cup down. Hot coffee slopped over the rim, scalding his hand. He swore, a low, vicious sound. Clara froze. She saw him, not as her Levi, but as the man in the gorge, the soldier. His eyes were dark, his body tense. He saw her face. He saw her fear, and the anger vanished, replaced by a deep, aching shame. "Damn it," he whispered. Not at her, but at himself. He turned his hand under the pump, the cold water stinging the burn. Clara came to him. She did not speak. She took his hand. She looked at the red, angry mark. She gently dried it with her apron, her touch soft. "I leave my boots by the stove," she said, her voice quiet. He looked up, confused. "What?" "I leave my muddy boots by the stove, every night, and you trip over them every morning, and you have never said a word. You just move them." He looked at her. A slow, pained smile touched his lips. "They are in the way." "I know." She smiled back. A small, weary smile. "I will try to remember the boots, if you try to remember that the coffee is not an enemy." He turned his hand, the one she was holding, and laced his fingers through hers. He lifted her hand, and he kissed her knuckles, the ones that were red and chapped from lye soap and hard work. I will try," he said. The kiss that followed was not passionate. It was an apology. It was a promise. It was the laughter and the peace that always came after the small storms. But the past was not gone. It was just buried, and sometimes it clawed its way out. Clara woke, her own scream lodged in her throat. She was sitting bolt upright, her nightgown plastered to her skin with cold sweat. The fire. She was in the fire. The smoke was in her lungs. Flint's face, his eyes wild, was leering at her. Arthur was there, hissing, ruined. Nothing, used. "No!" she gasped, her hands flailing, hitting something solid. "Clara! Clara! Wake up! You are here! You are safe!" Levi's voice. It was an anchor. She fell against him, her body shaking so violently her teeth rattled. He was solid. He was warm. He smelled of wood smoke and pine, not of ash. I was, she sobbed, burying her face in his chest. "I was back, in the mercantile, the fire." "Shh," he said. He did not tell her it was just a dream. He knew better. It was not just anything. It was a memory. He just held her. He wrapped his arms, and the blankets, around her, pulling her into his lap as if she were a child. He held her, his hand stroking her hair, his body a solid living wall between her and the ghosts. "You are safe," he murmured, over and over. "I am here. It is just the cabin. It is just the river. You are safe now. Clara, I've got you. I've got you." He held her all night. He did not sleep. He sat with his back against the rough wall, holding her, his gaze fixed on the dying embers in the hearth. He watched the shadows in the room, as if he could fight them, too. He held her as her trembling slowly subsided, as her breathing deepened into an exhausted sleep. When the first gray light of dawn crept into the cabin, she was still in his arms. He was still awake. He was still guarding her. He had been a soldier. He had been a killer. Now, he was just her protector, and that, he was learning, was a much harder and much better job. One evening, weeks later, the rhythm of their life was set. The summer was waning, the days growing shorter. The wind from the mountains had a new, sharp bite. They had spent the day working on the goat pen, their hands raw, their bodies tired in that good, clean way that comes from building, not from running. They sat on the small porch Levi had built, watching the sun set. The river bend caught the light, the water turning from blue to a deep, molten gold. "It is a good place," Clara said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "It is quiet," Levi agreed. They sat in silence. The land was wide and wild, but it was no longer hostile. It was theirs. Levi shifted. Clara felt the tension in him. He was not a man who was often nervous, but he was. His heart was beating a little faster under her ear. "Clara, I have something for you." She sat up. "What is it?" He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small, folded piece of cloth. It was not a new cloth. It looked like a piece of his old shirt, the one he had worn in the war. He opened his hand. He did not hand it to her. He just held it open. In his palm, wrapped in the faded blue cloth, was a ring. It was not a gold ring. It was not a fine, civilized ring. It was a ring of dull, gray metal. It was simple, a single band. But as she looked closer, she saw it was not perfect. It was carved. She saw the tool marks, the tiny, patient scratches. She saw the small, stamped mark on the inside. "Levi?" she whispered. "What?" "It is," he cleared his throat. "It is from a bullet shell. The one I fired in the gorge. After you." She looked at him, her eyes wide. I kept it," he said, his voice low, his gaze fixed on the ring. Not on her. I do not know why. It felt important." He had taken this object of death, this symbol of their shared violence, and with his own hands, with his knife, in the quiet hours of the night, he had carved it into a circle, a promise. I am not a man for a town. Clara," he said, his voice raw. "I am not a rich man. I do not have a name or a clean past. I have this land, this cabin. My hands, that is all I have." He finally looked at her. His pale, gray eyes were clear, and they were full of a love so deep and steady it took her breath away. "There was never anyone else," he said, and the words were a vow. "Not really, not since we were kids by the creek. There was never anyone else, and I do not want a wedding. I do not want a church, or a crowd, or a dowry." He took a breath. Unless it is just you, me, and this land." Clara's vision blurred. The tears came, but they were not the tears of a nightmare. They were not the tears of grief. They were the tears of a long, terrible drought, finally broken. They were tears of life. She did not say anything. She could not. She just held out her left hand, her fingers trembling, her palm still scarred from the fight, from the work. Levi's hand, calloused and steady, took hers. He gently, reverently, slid the bullet shell ring onto her finger. It fit. She cried. She put her other hand to her mouth, a sob of pure, unadulterated joy, a sound she had not made since she was a child, escaping her. "Yes," she whispered. "Oh, Levi, yes." He pulled her to him, and he kissed her. It was not the desperate, hungry kiss of the trail. It was not the reverent, healing passion of their room in Santa Rosa. It was not the apologetic, domestic kiss of the morning. This kiss was soft, it was slow, it was full of the sunset, and the sound of the river, and the scent of pine. It was full of everything they had survived. It was the kiss of two broken souls who had, together, become whole. It was the kiss of a beginning. When they pulled apart, the last sliver of the sun was gone, and the first stars were appearing in the high, clear sky. Levi stood, pulling her to her feet. He tucked her hand into the crook of his arm, the hand that now bore his ring. "Come on," he said softly. "The goats, they need feeding." "The goats," she repeated, her voice thick with her tears, and with laughter. "Yes, the goats." He put his arm around her waist, and she put hers around his, and they walked, not back into the cabin, but toward the fields, toward the new life they were building. They walked, hand in hand, two small, strong figures against the vast, darkening landscape. The horizon was wide, and it was wild, but finally, it was theirs. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly hope it brought you into the dust and heart of the Wild West. It would mean the world to me to hear from you. Please, take a moment to comment below and let me know where in the world you are listening from. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to From Wild West so you do not miss a single story. And finally, share your thoughts in English. What part of Clara and Levi's journey stayed with you? I read every comment, and I cannot wait to hear from you.